popular education gives people any sense of agency and control over their work. And I'm telling these stories as a way of saying that at its best, or most challenging, adult learning is dealing with the interface between the personal, the community, and the global in quite powerful and, I think, quite impressive ways. Back at home, changed from doing earnest stuff now. This was, he's died now, I'm afraid, Fred Moore, who was 108, and we, as part of Adult Learners Week, which is a sort of big festival I started through, which happens every year, we set out to find the oldest learner in the UK, and he turned out within a year to be the oldest man in the UK, and he was learning French and art in his residential home in New Milton in Hampshire. It's an illustration of demography makes a difference. We had a party at the Ministry of Education for the oldest learner in each region of England, and of the most adventurous learner over 100, you know, the most adventurous curriculum being studied. 20 people there, absolutely fantastic party. I went away from it bubbling, got in a taxi to go off to some other event, and telling the taxi driver about it. He said, here, he says, doesn't he know he's not going to be Picasso again? And then there was a long pause, and he said, actually, he's twice as old as I am, and got more gumption. I should do something too. And the point I'm making is you can use these changes to inspire people to allow the stories of things that work to set agendas for other people to join in. And the question I have, lurking behind all that storytelling, is about the role in relation to what kinds of studies we legitimise or focus on in that extended period of time we have within frameworks for doctoral studies. What is a pedagogy of transformation in the academy as opposed to in the field? Harbens-Bowler argued in, who's a distinguished Indian adult educator, operating out of Indiana, in the middle of the States. He argued that adult learning was two things. It was structure, registers, curriculum, quality of teaching, inspection, all of that, on the one hand. And it was a culture as well, not only a structure, but a culture. And within the culture, he said, adults educate other adults by beating drums for attention, singing folk songs, shouting messages over loudspeakers, putting posters on the wall, organising political and religious functions on street corners, and spreading the message over the radio and television. And I think we're so much more comfortable writing about the first of those things, the structure, than we are about this loose and messy margin to our work. You know, the World Education Forum meets every January in Davos, where Bill Gates and George Soros and government leaders have fun for a couple of days deciding on the world economy. Well, the World Social Forum was created because people felt excluded from that exercise. 100,000 people in this one in Porto Alegre in southern Brazil, inventing alternate futures. And again, my concern is, how do we have a scholarship that brings principle, theory, philosophy, psychology, the rigour of what we already know, and bring it with the same energy to the things we need to invent for tomorrow, future studies kind of arguments. So this was the World Social Forum, people's struggles, people's alternatives. The point about it is it really does involve the voice of learners. It isn't only an issue around experts shaping an agenda which other people then sign up to. And so finally, to the subject, how can doctoral studies help with all of this? Well, if this is the triangle of places you might look for evidence, you might interpret the evidence, you might shape practice with it, that your group has got a primary focus on, it seems to me unarguable that doctoral studies sit most comfortably at the research end of that agenda. That is, the skills, all of the detailed conversations we were having about methodology and method this morning were about how to ensure that people have a sufficient and adequate rigour to be able to do the critical thinking in a systematic, intelligent and defensible way at the highest levels that we're able to generate. Policy and practice are floppier, aren't they? I mean, you know, leadership and management is one of the core functions of what goodness me, you've only got to go to an airport to see how anxious everybody is about the latest 4 Ps, 5 Qs, 7 Bs that will kind of make the short span of attention of important business leaders or decision makers able to think about something for 10 minutes at a time. Now, how does the substantial, rigorous, carefully modulated work that's characteristic of a doctorate get transformed into something that works for a decision maker who's too busy to read and for whom time to read has been eroded and for whom space to think outside your box is eroded by 500 emails a day or whatever it is. And similarly in relation to practice, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is how far do people who do undertake systematics in practice, what's the transfer to their own practice, and how far does their own practice shape what we think of as the form of doctoral studies? I'm very interested in that migration from PhD to EdD, because I think it is a response to the material circumstances of many people coming to learning who want to move beyond the master's level. I'm also interested in why the MBA is the core disciplinary achievement in relation to people working in the world of business. The presumption is you can't spend the time to do the PhD. So the things that people really focus on is gaining the advanced but not, as it were, groundbreaking levels. So the dilemma for adult learning, summing up, is it's a little bit of the education system, a modest bit. Most of its resources are for vocational preparation, continuing professional development, a tiny amount for community and personal development, and most of that disappearing. But at the same time, and that's the point of all my earlier slides, it's a key catalyst in the achievement of other social policy goals. You can't achieve the Millennium Development Goals around HIV/AIDS if there isn't an engagement with adults about what safe sex practices are. You don't get clean water and sanitation policies without people changing their habits around the use of sanitation facilities. You don't get improvements in crops to feed rapidly growing populations without people learning new agricultural practices and so on. And none of that can happen without, and frankly your children don't really get the benefits of initial education unless they're enthused by their mothers. You know that old African proverb about if you teach a woman to read and write, you've taught the village, but if you teach a man, not much else happens really. And as women we don't provide the opportunities for. So, I mean, looking at these on the key catalyst, I thought, well, there are really powerful bits of work that desperately need doing. They're not quite, let's do what government needs to be done, but by analysing where scepticisms lie, where there's a gap in the public common sense and understanding. One of them is, we looked at is around the wider benefits of learning. If you listen to government, they'll say low-level qualifications not really worth investing in. Higher-level ones have a more immediate rate of return. So we helped with the study of the wider benefits of learning research centre at the Institute of Education in Berkeley, using doctoral students as well as a core team, who analysed some of the longitudinal population studies to produce really powerful associations that learning prolongs active citizenship. It both inhibits the onsets of Alzheimer's, but also enables you to go around it for longer so that you can carry on being social for a greater period of your life. And then frankly you die faster because it does manifest itself, and so you're helplessly dependent on your loved ones for a shorter period of time. People who take up learning are more likely to give up smoking. There's learners, you know, if you measure learners and non-learners over a population over certainly a period, you could see a 34% increase in racial tolerance amongst people who've engaged in learning. It opens people's eyes. Everybody gets more politically cynical as they get older, but learners become politically cynical at a slower rate than others. So I think politicians ought to pump money in, and everybody gets fed up with their lives until they're 42 when it gets better, but learners get less fed up than others. And all of these are perfectly powerfully evidenced details, and unlike participation in most of the convention forms, where you can tell by social class who's likely to end up in Oxford, those effects happen whatever your prior education and whatever your social class background. So they're really powerful bits of evidence. I went to see George Osborne with the minister 2 years ago when they'd just come into office and they were making cuts to say you can't cut adult education, it's too important. Laughter across the table. And we produced this evidence, and they said, yes, they said, but you can't prove causality. Powerful association, yes, but you can't prove causality. We said, no, of course you can't, but then you can't prove causally a relationship between qualifications and productivity either, and we build a whole policy around that. And my point is, you researchers can have a direct impact on the policy arena if they translate the work that they do into questions, not so much that feed the beast of what government wants, but in order to critique it more effectively. So certainly for me, doctorates of and for the people have got something to do with looking for equivalences of that kind. But looked at from outside, it does seem to me there's a tension between demonstrating the rigour you need for academic credibility and capturing the attention of busy and sceptical policymakers. A quick win is the opposite of a PhD, isn't it? You get your APS week 1, you can demonstrate it in 5,000 words. Hope that doesn't meet the criteria. Do you see what I mean? So that's a problem. I thought of the library at the one end and the World Social Forum at the other as arenas for the creation of knowledge. And well, doctorates by and large more comfortable at the library end of it, I think. Between the measurement of individual excellence and collective understanding. Because to go back to the Haiti example, or the Philippines example, the creation of effective educational strategies and the learning involved there didn't sit with the organiser, it sits with all the people who were engaged in it. So how do we have at the highest levels of rigour collective doctorates, collective imprimatas of this is evidence of a seriously, dynamically learning society? The kind of work that Gustav Boal was responsible for with the Theatre of the Oppressed is all built around everybody having an equal voice in the transformation of their society. So as you nudge towards a democratic understanding of what citizenship is, there's an argument about the democratising of the forms of validation academies ought to be able to offer. But I think throwing into question how far we can go down that route, and I think there are proper questions to ask you anyway, between the apprenticeship of elites and the creation of knowledge societies. And time, I've said that before, is an inevitable pressure for people who are under pressure of leaders and managers. I talked to a man who's in charge of UNESCO's Institute of Lifelong Learning last week. He said there's never a day he doesn't get 300 emails, most of them with attachments, and most of them he's supposed to look